you from CARE. So good to be here. Yeah. So if I can, have my slides, please. So this is the locally led adaptation seminar. You are in the right place if you're interested in adaptation to a changing climate, because we all know that you're bringing my slides, right? Thanks. Oh, I use my own clicker. Thank you. So agency, locally led. Okay, so why do we need this? Because the world is changing, and we have to remember that in addition to floods and droughts, we also have rapidly changing market price fluctuations. In fact, we have the worst food insecurity than we've had ever since COVID in decades. So we also have the problem of value conflicts. So traditional science has worked really well to deal with things where we all are aligned to, like, reach the moon or to save bald eagles. We have all worked together and made that happen, even complex problems. But when there's a value conflict, when there is the problem of we need food security, but we also can't have greenhouse gases getting excessive, when we have soil degradation challenges with increasing, maximizing yield, biodiversity losses, but we also need to feed the world. So there's these types of things where there's inherently some win losses. We need to have local agency to adapt local solutions. So fortunately, there is new types of science and new types of governance that are emerging. And I think this COP 30, where we talk about implementation, about collaboration and partnerships, is exactly where we need to make this shift towards locally led adaptation, which includes 8 principles. I know there's only 4 there. I'll get there. So we have devolving decision making to the lowest appropriate level. We have addressing structural inequities. These are the principles of locally led adaptation. We need to have the finance and the commitment to that finance. This is one of the biggest problems, but guess what? In agriculture, the finance is there, right? It's going for currently for what? Subsidies. Agricultural subsidies do not increase local governance, but we could shift them. Investing in local capabilities. We also need to build robust understandings, obviously. We need to have flexible programming, ensure transparency and accountability. And finally, again, COP 30 is about what? Collaboration in order to make implementation happen. So with these principles, we are going to hear today about local adaptation, which is one of the principles and one of the area works of the CG's climate action. And welcome, Giriraj. So we have our whole panel, so really looking forward to hearing from things. And there'll be questions at the end, so please stay engaged. We really look forward to your input. All right. Transformative adaptive pathways. Over to John.
Thank you very much, Sig. I'm embarrassed to be standing here sweating away. I actually live in Manila in the Philippines, so I should be used to the heat, but I don't know. Hold it closer. Right, that's better. Okay, picking up from Sig then. 4 slides, and I just want to provide more scene setting. So we're talking about locally led climate adaptation, but I want to put it into the broader context of transformative adaptation and the importance of nurturing that sustainable and equitable approach to climate adaptation. So why transformative adaptation? Why transformative adaptation? Push it really hard, speak louder. This goes back to 2022, the IPCC report, where the term started to be used a lot with a root objective of tackling the causes of vulnerability. And I was working with some colleagues here and others in the CGIAR thinking that this means we have to do research differently and we put together a think piece back in 2022. And from that has evolved the work we're doing on locally led climate adaptation. If you're going to tackle the root causes of vulnerability, if you're going to move towards sustainable and equitable adaptation pathways, then things have got to be locally led. And as Sig said, we do have not CG, it was driven by a plethora of different partners, the so-called principles of locally led adaptation, which you can look up, and they're good. The challenge, as always, is operationalizing those principles. And Ryan and I and others were involved in a meeting only 10 days ago in Washington, D.C., with the World Bank, the IFC, the Gates Foundation, and also the Center for Global Development, to look specifically at how one best operationalizes the principles of locally led adaptation. And in that vein, we've been working on tools and methodologies as ways to help the operationalization. The picture you can see is of a guide, a handbook, which has just come out. I've got 1 or 2 flyers on it. You can download it. And it's one of many which is talking about different approaches. Why is it important? As I said at the beginning, I'm pushing this as hard as I bloody can. Sorry. And it's not moving. So the last slide, why is it important? Not only because we're looking at a topical issue, but many of us sitting here in this room spend more time looking at how we can find the funding for our research. What is, I think, very favorable and good for us is that there is tremendous interest in locally led climate adaptation. I mentioned the meeting with the World Bank. You can just see 4 random publications that have come out in the last few years, which are all about locally led climate adaptation, tackling the root causes of vulnerability, gender and other intersectionalities, which is why we use the term social equity. Gender alone is critical, but there are other intersectionalities which mustn't be forgotten. And I think if we can come together as a team, if we can articulate how we're going to work together to operationalize local led climate adaptation, then I believe the financing will follow. But the onus is on us, I think, to provide a convincing narrative. And I know the other speakers are going to be adding detail to what I've had to say. So thank you very much. Over to, I'm jinxed with this.
Okay, climate tolerant technologies. Who is it? Who is? Come on. Okay. Thank you. Please bring it forward. Yeah.
Forward is this? Yeah. Yeah. Hi, thank you. So, uh, as we were talking about, it's about the value in questions. So the value in question to us is actually cultural value, social value, economic value, and also the integrity of the environment. So how we perceive locally led adaptation in care. So yeah, so many think that many believe that LLA has evolved from stages to stages. Now it is more consultative, more community centric. Community has more to say, in decision making and planning. So we also believe so. However, when a group of participants in community based adaptation uh, conference in Bangkok 2023 was asked how they perceive locally led adaptation, they said that the CBA is pretty much at the bullseye, and the LLA principles are the principles which they require to achieve CBA. So CBA to them was a kind of a more programmatic thing, and LLA principles are the guiding principles to achieve CBA. Sorry, is it? Oh, okay. Please allow me some time. Your colleagues are fixing it. Yeah. Yeah. So my time is, yeah, yeah, on pause. Thank you. So this is an example how we operationalize LLA. So as you can see, it's a kind of compiled adaptation plan, local adaptation plan from one sub-district of Bangladesh from several unions. So what we did, CARE has a tool, like many other organizations, CVCA, Climate Vulnerability and Capacity Assessment. It has 9 steps, and through that, what we do, we assess the vulnerability and capacity of the community, and also assess the impact of climate stresses, and come up with sector-based climate adaptation plan. So this is the plan the community has, and what to do with that. How much CARE can do? CARE can only do only as much, right? We have projects. So what we do, we collaborate. We collaborate with local government. We validate this with the local government and also with the other actors, civil society, and so that they can take up the rest. And we have taken up this to the level where this adaptation plan has been part of the budget of the local government, so that they take, they have to take the sheer responsibility, right? So what we do is facilitate. So we are not only implementing, we are also facilitating a locally led adaptation implementation process. That's what we're doing. So, as you can see that this adaptation plan, there are sectoral plan, and also we have plans on agriculture as well. So what we do in terms of agriculture, if you talk about technologies, we do drip irrigation, we do raised bed farming, because we are talking about the marginalized farmer, or at best the smallholders. We do not work for the industrial agriculture, right? So, and in terms of irrigation, we use surface water, not groundwater. We are doing rainwater harvesting for irrigation, and also there is a much more emphasis on regenerative agriculture, because we are also mindful of the soil health. So that's the kind of technologies we are promoting. So as we are saying, in terms of promoting and adhering to the LLA principles, so we look at this, that we have to approach it uh, as a whole of society approach. That is why, as I told you, we collaborate with government, we collaborate with academia and researchers, because we need evidence, and the evidence and the solutions has to be backed by evidence. That's what we do. And of course we work with the civil society. And finally, of course, so we work, the donors, we have to acknowledge them, because this is their money, we take it to the community. So overall, CARE approaches LLA in a way so that we can serve the interest of the community, and also help strengthening their resilience in a way so that they can survive in this very competing environment. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to hear from Todd next. Are you? The positive deviance approaches? Sorry? Yeah, I thought Gary Raj was next, but okay, we'll get there. All right. So Todd Crane is also representing Birgit, and we're going to hear about, yes, positive deviance. So exciting. Can't wait to hear.
Thank you, everyone. Are farmers waiting for solutions from scientists to tackle climate change? No. They're doing their own thing. They're adapting themselves, because that's what farmers do. How do we operationalize locally led adaptation from a research for development sort of organization that acknowledges and starts with the fact that farmers are adapting without us? That's okay, but we still want to help them even though they're starting without us. So what I'm presenting here is an approach to operationalizing locally led adaptation that we've been working on, called Pioneer Positive Deviance. How can a research organization come in and support them? How do we operationalize the integration of local knowledge into adaptation? It's all over UNFCCC documents. It's all over all sorts of other kind of nationally or internationally prescriptive documents. But how do we do it in practice? The Pioneer Positive Deviance approach is pretty simple. Instead of going out to farmers, producers in rural areas and saying, hey, we've got this thing, we really think it's going to help you do a better living. Instead, we go out and say, hey, What are you doing out here that works? What are the climate stresses you're experiencing? What are the innovations? Who are the people in your communities who are doing things a little differently, who are getting by where other people are struggling? Those are the pioneers. Those are the positive deviants in the system, the seeds of change that are already going on out there, embedded and situated within rural livelihoods and rural communities. It starts with identification of the people, characterization of the practices. In this case, we were looking at, we were in a Kenyan mixed dairy system, especially interested in fodder. Feed availability is a major limiting factor for climate change adaptation and, for that case, mitigation in these spaces. Despite starting with farmers' innovations, this still involves scientists. The question is, for operationalizing locally led adaptation, how do we get scientists, international and national scientists, to come in a supportive role, in a light touch role that acknowledges the farmers' innovations at the beginning? How do we bring public extension and private extension, for that matter, into facilitating farmers' innovations? So we look at the innovation, we learn about it together. But even farmers, what they don't know can't help them. There are spaces where the researchers can help strengthen. So we learn together, but it's not just about identifying an innovation, an adaptation practice. It's not just about characterizing it. It's about scaling it, because that's where the impact happens. Again, who's a farmer most likely to take advice from? No, Ole, you know better. It's not other scientists, but thank you for the levity. It's other farmers. We all know this. How do we capitalize upon that? Why don't we capitalize upon that more? So the scaling strategy that we're working on builds on these pioneer farmers. We characterize, we understand, we strengthen the practice, and then they lead the scaling process. They organize, conceptualize, run the field days to scale it out. Obviously, we are there in a supportive function. Research still has a role. The local private sector has important roles in this scaling process. The local extension system is there. They're very enthusiastic about this approach, which is kind of a shot in the arm, a refreshing approach to their own jobs. Farmers lead the scaling, and then of course there's this iterative cycle. What did we learn from this? How do we strengthen? How do we strengthen the scaling process? How do we improve the innovations, in this case the feed innovations that people are doing, to do it better the next time? In just a few years, working with 45 pioneers, we have reached over 20,000 farmers with improved feeding practices that started with farmers themselves. And the impact report on it, we show that this is measurably increasing people's profitability and productivity. This is having an impact. Without science-led technologies, science-supported and improved technologies. Looking at the 8 principles of locally led adaptation, we are devolving decision-making to the lowest level, the appropriate level. We are addressing structural inequalities through a gender component in this program. We are investing in capabilities to address and co-create solutions, and that not just farmer capabilities, but scientists' capabilities to co-create. This is a skill building for scientists and researchers themselves on how to support farmers. We are engaging in flexible programming and iterative learning. And we are definitely engaging in collaborative action with the private sector, local finance, and this. We're still working on sustainable finance component. This isn't perfect yet, and we're still working on institutionalization. But in conclusion, I think this is a very promising start on operationalizing locally led adaptation. Next, we missed some things. We missed several of the PowerPoints. I was going to be last. God, this is. You got to be kidding me. Technology is definitely not the answer. I don't know what's happened, but Guraj, you know your stuff. Ryan, you know your stuff. Your slides are, you don't need this. We're improvising here.
Thank you, Todd. I think for LLA, you have to localize further without a presentation. So I'm going to speak on LLA work we are leading in Zambia. It is a 4 year of our efforts in locally led adaptation. Like every LLA, what you heard so far, there is no one size fit LLA models are available. When we read the globally recognized WRI and other global climate adaptation, they all come with various principles on locally led adaptation, and many countries have endorsed that 108. More than 100 plus countries endorse the locally led adaptation. But when you go to a countries in Zambia, it's for me a second home working on locally led adaptation. We have worked in southern province of Zambia called Monze district, where the communities have recurrent drought year on year, which is a written period of 5 to 10 years of massive drought happens, and do not have access to quality drinking water. They do not grow any farming practices. And most of the time when the drought happens, they have to sell off their livestock. That's a very painful situation when we visited the locally led adaptation activities in Zambia. So what we did was we have a 6 step locally led prioritization process, and it includes basically understanding a greater partnership in terms of collaboration and identifying the existing natural resources that are available in the region, whether it is in terms of forest, water resources, and the livestock system exists there. We looked at what kind of infrastructure we can build. We don't want to start with setting up a solar borehole, but it's how do we build a community-led, locally-led process. So we came with a blended finance model where CGIAR will invest a solar borehole, and we have also brought in the community to have co-financing of the same investment so that they build a trust and long-term sustainability and partnership on accelerating this process. And the third part of implementing that entire process includes the community 100% involvement, the labor cost, the management efforts, all that are led by the community itself. So we now set up a solar borehole of irrigation system, which is 100-meter groundwater potential is available, and the communities have expanded 13 home gardening site, and they were not able to sell any livestock due to the drought in the last 3 years because of access to groundwater, and the turf is available where they can provide drinking water to the livestock. And importantly, now the communities are able to make roughly $40 per day income, which is again, we started with Anna Maria, the Climber initiative in Zambia. So we did an impact evaluation for the last 1 year with a third party assessment. We have seen how much income is grown, how much water access have been improved. More importantly, the women are growing for the first time the vegetables in that region. They are now growing 9 different vegetable crops, and they are making roughly about $40 income per day, which is really amazing. And the second thing is, now there is a lot of in-scaling is happening around the villages now, because often when other humanitarian actor go, they just see entry point of setting up a solar borehole. They don't look beyond the agri-food system landscape. So we looked at how do you value the water as an entry point, but more important is bringing the livelihood resilience in the long term. Most of the region in drought prone, they only focus on drinking water as an entry point, but we looked at the whole value chain. Secondly, it is fully led by the 10 women volunteers. Solar committee has been established, and they are making roughly about monthly 10 kaucha income that they are collecting from each of the household, maintenance of the solar panel, setting up the home gardening, etc. So we really see that that LLA principles, what we learned in the global process, we need to do a lot more customization depending on the voices coming from the community itself. So that's the evidence we have. Unfortunately, our slide is not working. So I'll stop here, but happy to share more materials later in the course of the presentation. Thank you. Over to you.
So that was very exciting hearing about Zambia, because we know that horrible 100-year drought in 2023, and my kids are from near there, so I feel very personally excited about that work. Thank you so much. So we're going to hear from Ryan from IFPRI, who's going to talk a bit about, we need new infrastructure, right? We need living labs, we need positive deviance, we need climate smart valleys, we need ways to really, how can we, and we heard from CARE also about how these community-led efforts and a whole society approach, but we really do, particularly from the research side of this implementation COP, how do we do locally led adaptation through new types of, really first time in thousands and thousands of years, a new type of research. So with that build up, over to Ryan.
Thank you, Sig. And it's a shame my slides won't work because I prepared a nice animated video that I might submit it to a few film festivals, so we'll catch it there. No, I'm kidding. Hopefully they don't show up now because I don't have a great video. So yeah, as Sig mentioned, I'm Ryan Nearing from the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington. I'll be talking about living labs, and please let me know if it does come up. So what are living labs? Among other things, living labs are essentially building a platform or building infrastructure for innovation that centers local innovation and local people. But going beyond, and positive deviance, which now you all know a lot about from Todd, is inherently connected and often contributes to the innovation process in living labs. So we have 4 basic characteristics of living labs. There's many, and there's a broad literature, which I encourage you to look at. One is that it's inherently multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral. So it's a systems approach for innovation. It often starts with farmers, but not always. It could start with some other place in the system, whether that's a food system or a food shed. And then it's often iterative across those different stakeholders. So in positive deviance, identifying an innovation will then be shared iteratively with other people in the system for constant improvements and feedback loops to go back to other stakeholders. It's also user-centered. Now, users is sometimes not the most appropriate word for agro-ecosystems or low and middle income countries. We tend to think of it more as citizen-centric, but the sense there being that those who would be using any type of technology or innovation are at the center of that innovation process. So it's a sort of circular process, again, iterative. Third is that it, or lastly, is that it's, oh, what is the fourth one now? I had it on my slide. Is that it's real world based. Through experimentation, it's based in a real world context. So as you probably guessed, living lab comes from laboratory, which is often experimentation in a controlled setting or a so-called controlled setting. And in this case, it takes place in the real world. Now, how you define that real world is really essential to the process and the methods, which we've done. One of the key other characteristics that I didn't include in the 4, because it's slightly different, is co-creation. And Todd also mentioned co-creation. We did a separate research project. Cue the slide that shows the publication on co-creation. It's published in Development Policy Review recently, open access, where we developed a framework or an approach to co-creation, which has become a word very common in development discourse now, to try and give it a bit more meaning. And we, among other things, in the paper, there's a series of methods that I think everybody would probably enjoy reading. We developed one on political economy, and this is really about, in reference to locally led adaptation, being strategic in the groups you're working with or addressing structural inequalities. So looking at how we can identify the most marginalized people, because those are the ones most affected by the systems we want to change, and therefore working with them or centering them in the innovation process can help transform those systems. And secondly is a process of reflection, and that's more about looking up. So how can us as researchers or facilitators in the innovation process be conscious about their own power, their own position in the process to make sure that they're not deciding the agenda or driving the entire process itself. 1 minute. Next is the slide on our map where we've been working. The past 4 years, we've been working in Colombia, Kenya, China, and Vietnam. And over those past 4 years, we've developed a process where those living labs will continue, even though our operations are ending this year. Todd and Birgit, his colleague Birgit, are leading that work in Kenya. In other countries, it's a local partner. Going forward from next year and then hopefully 3 to 4 years after that, we'll be working in Brazil, here, in Nigeria, and in India. Crucially, I've mentioned a lot of implementation. Now, we as researchers, I think, is an important role to identify. I mentioned a bit of the methods we've looked at with co-creation or co-production of knowledge. Living labs also emerged out of Europe. And so a lot of the terminology, like I mentioned, user-centric approaches, is not necessarily so appropriate for agro-ecosystems or low and middle income countries. And so we've been conducting a lot of research in the 4 countries over the past 3 years to look at how this concept can be adapted and really utilized for more powerful and participatory innovation or locally led innovation in those countries. So we have a whole host of resources, and I had a slide with a bunch of methods that we've implemented, one of those being positive deviance. But going forward in the other 3 countries, we also have some themes. Yesterday, we had an event on national school feeding programs, which will be up, I think, on the YouTube page quickly, and that's our work in Brazil. So yeah, look forward to that. And had my email up there, but again, Ryan Nearing from IFPRI. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Go back to the. Okay, so the next is going to be Anna-Marie and Nanda. Sorry, they didn't again. Nandan, please come up. They're going to each get 5 minutes to summarize what they've seen and what their thoughts are overall on locally led adaptation. Then they each get 5 minutes. Then they're going to query us, and I'm sure they'll have very hard questions for us. Those that did the lightning talks. So looking forward to your comments, and then we'll hear from Anna-Marie. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I'll share my reflection from all these presentations. Then I'll share my experiences of working on a locally led adaptation projects in Bangladesh. The first learning for me is locally led adaptation must not mean locally left alone. When we are talking about upscaling the amazing locally led projects that CGIAR Bangladesh has been doing, community leadership is combined with structured co-creation between local actors, academic institutions, and crucially, the government and other non-government entities. The point is, without deliberate science policy community linkages, we risk small, isolated projects rather than system level changes in the adaptation paradigm. That's where the power of co-creation comes. A collaborative space where all the relevant stakeholders participate in the system for creating not isolated standalone projects, but a system-wide transformation across scale. And regarding the second part, in 2017, we worked with communities of Bangladesh to implement some technological solution on amphibious housing or for the flood-prone communities. We literally applied all the possible participatory rural appraisal techniques to learn from the communities, to engage the communities. But what happened, that project was so successful, it got United Nations recognitions and everyone, all the possible recognition for us. But by 2019, what we found, the communities did not want that. So the lesson learned from our end was we missed something. And the missing part was local politics. Local politicians were not involved on that project. So with all these lessons learned, what we did when we implemented the second version of that climate resilient home project in Bangladesh, what we did, we literally spent all our money for research to approach 18,000 households and government and academia. And now what we are seeing that it's much more inclusive, it's locally led. Actually, when we approach 18,000 households, do you know what we asked? We asked them, can you tell us what constitutes your dream home? not what we think as engineers or as architects. And when that design came from locally, and when we translated that into reality, we built a prototype that became a huge success now. So that's my experience of locally led adaptation projects. But again, I'm saying that without properly engaging other actors, government, academia, non-government actors, probably it's very difficult to upscale across the system. Thank you so much.
All right, next we're going to hear from Anna Marie.
Hello. So this is a little bit of improvising because I was supposed to comment on the presentations and I was ready to take my notes, even though I have heard Ryan many times now by now. So I know your presentation. And I know Giriraj because we work together. I know Giriraj, okay, because we work together. But I'm not going to comment on the presentations because I think that I wouldn't do justice. And just some just food for thought and take it as it is. um, I'm really excited about the locally led adaptation agenda. I think that we need to put more efforts. I think that we need to put more resources. But it is still challenging. And the reason that I'm saying that it is still challenging is I believe that there's still a tension in terms of, having good locally led processes and scaling. And at the end of the day, what all of us are looking for is, reaching the numbers. There are so many million small scale producers around the world. How do we make sure that they all can benefit from these processes? And 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 there's just, I think that even though there has been a lot of conversations, I believe that there's still a tension between the local specificity of these approaches to be successful and how you can go from there into reaching the big numbers that we want to reach. So that's something that it's very important to take into account. The second, perhaps, dimension of the issue is the sustainability. And I was just listening from you, Ryan. I think you said, yeah, we were working on these living labs in these countries, and then we are moving to other countries, hoping that other local stakeholders are going to continue the work. How sustainable these things are. And even though we are super excited that the CGIAR is finally moving into at least 5 years period of the programs, and we really encourage that. So there's, potentially in 2030, you're going to be in a situation where you say, okay, we have been investing a lot in these countries, in these living labs, in the climate smart villages, call it the way that you want. And then what is going to happen after that? And then that brings me to my third point, which is co-creation. So co-creation is part of this. I totally agree. We have seen how many times when we really co-create, things get closer to be impactful. But it's so for co-creating, you need to know how to do it. You need to have expertise. You need to understand how to combine these different actors. And that's not always the case. And that was a little bit of reflection from the last week in Brasilia on the CSA conference, and it was actually Katia from AgriCorp that mentioned this. She said, well, it's not that easy because everybody wants to do it. And I think that from the founder's perspective, we love to see the word, we love to see co-creation, but then making that a reality, it is not easy. And you need people that know how to do it. Not only the ones that are driving the processes, but these stakeholders that are part of the processes. And many times they are not there. And many times, and I'm just closing with this, the incentives are not there. So we love multi-stakeholder platforms. We believe in them. We think that we can get better results, but especially under the current circumstances, reductions in funding, it is hard to collaborate. And you need really strong incentives to make sure that you are able to perhaps give a portion of the pie to others so that you can get to greater impacts. And that's not always the case. So I think that aligning incentives to these kind of processes, it's very important. Having the right expertise among stakeholders is really important. Addressing scaling challenges, it's really important. And sustainability of these processes, once that the donors, the CG, the organizations are not working on this, it's really important as well. Thanks.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that. Oh, sorry. So we're going to have everyone up here in a minute, so don't sit down there. So I just want to say that I, 20 years ago, published on participatory action research and scaling. So I'm going to take the moderator's privilege for a second and say there are 3 ways that I see locally led adaptation can scale. And I really agree with you that we're not there for just, it's wonderful to work with a couple of villages, as I've done in Malawi for 30 years. But one is sandbox, right? If your climate smart village or your living lab or your positive deviance location can be a policy sandbox. So that can be a way to try out policies and local governance, what works where, right? So that we're not just supporting training a few people in governance, we're actually seeing which policies, which types of support for governance work. So there's sandbox. Second, there is actually options by context equals performance. So, breeders are not the only ones within a formula, right? That actually developing innovations and options that are co-created with communities, with stakeholders through innovation platforms or through learning living labs, they've actually proven better. I mean, if you look at breeding where they have something encapsulated, they have seeds. Seeds can scale. So other types of options, whether it's a conservation, agricultural innovation, business model, the solar irrigation, these types of things, to make sure that they're human-centered engineering, that they work, you can try them in a living lab and see in that option. But then we need to characterize the living lab. So we need things like digital twins. So I think it's CG, and this is just my personal, not as climate action, but Sandra Milix knows I'm passionate about this. And I just got to give comments at the end of the Living Lab meeting where I said it is a call for action. If we don't build living labs and other types of infrastructure, it'll be business as usual and we'll help a few communities, but I'm sorry, but care is better. We're too expensive. So as CG, if we don't build a new type of infrastructure for locally led adaptation that provides options by context that actually work, that provides new policies, that actually provides use cases where there's actually change that scales, and then also supports local governance, what are we doing? So if not now, then when? So sorry for taking over the microscope for a bit. I am a professor, so forgive me. Okay, so if we can have everyone who gave the 3-minute lightning talks up, and we can then hear questions, starting with Nanda. In order to, your guys supposed to ask them hard questions.
We're on under the spotlight.
All right, final questions. All right, I'm gonna moderate. So over to Nando to ask a question, and then Anne-Marie, you can ask questions. You already asked us a hard one, though. Can you ask them some questions?
Yes. So
For Joe.
we have already talked about the power of co-creation and the challenges that we face in upscaling. So if we just try to be specific about what are the financial and policy level challenges that need to be addressed when the upscaling of locally led adaptation projects come. Anyone?
Okay. I think listening from the experience we had in Zambia, mainly was the provincial government, their ownership is very, very important, because what we are driving is a very granular LLA principles and co-designing that with the community. But then we need to go for the upscaling process where we need much more partnership from the provincial government. or the state, province, whatever the definition would be, because they do have their national budget getting approved to the provincial government. But then, like the CARE example that was mentioned, so the participation of local government is very, very important as we want to upscale that efforts. But it's also important that they might be doing that process for ages, but we are only putting a new flavor of locally led adaptation. But we need to make sure that their language and the terminology what we are bringing has to be more coherent. Then we can drive the many of the process and the policies that can drive much more in the long run. Otherwise, we cannot see this more as an academic and development process. We need to bring that more ownership thinking. That would be my statement.
If I can add on to that, I think it's not just which stakeholders to bring in, but when and how. Which goes back to Anna Maria's comment about co-design and co-creation. These are things we throw around very lightly, very frequently, especially in the CG in the last few years. But to really recognize that as a skill, it's not a tick box exercise. It's you hold a workshop, you invite some people and check we've co-designed. It's a skill. It's something that takes practice. It takes some training. And that needs to be recognized so that we don't just use the words lightly, but we substantiate it. We do it well. So we bring in the right partners at the right times, in the right ways. And some of the ways of doing things under these locally led adaptation is really turning relationships and the usual structures upside down. And that takes some facilitation. Needs to be done carefully so as not to alienate people, but to bring people along.
Thank you. So, why I believe that there are a few missing links. So, one missing link I'd say incentive, because there are so many actors. Everybody needs incentives to be able to pursue this locally adaptation. Another thing is when you say, yes, we are co-designing, but we are not co-opting. It has to be co-opted as well. That's second. Third is that, the actors compete, which is fine, but we do not find enough time to, to get the common avenues where we can actually incentivize everyone. So these 3 points.
John, Ryan?
Don't forget about me down here. And I'm going to talk about power. No, but really, just a really quick note on the co-creation. I think as the role of research and generating evidence. I mentioned very briefly that publication and the research process we did on co-production or co-creation. One of the crucial things we picked up in that methods paper is the reflexivity process, because too often researchers, donors, or those who tend to have relatively more power in the co-creation process are missing, which is just a huge opportunity loss in the co-creation process. And so in that paper, we found a lot of amazing methods from public health, actually. There's so much more advanced in this reflexive process for researchers and for those that are in power in the co-creation process that I think is completely diluted for most of development co-creation and that sort of discourse. So just wanted to sort of mention, again, looking up and the importance of power, recognizing it.
Yeah, just very briefly. It's all going to come down to partnerships. Partnerships take time to nurture. There's issues of power asymmetries within partnerships. Challenge as researchers is that everything is so short term and we let partners down by funding being cut. And at the end of the day, in order to establish proper partnerships, I keep coming back to a commentary that I read in Nature last year, that we all need a touch of humility, recognizing the experience of others. And as researchers, we're not always very good at encompassing humility. And as Sig said, CARE is far better at scaling probably than we are. So let's partner, touch of humility, and stop lurching from 1 year funding to another.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to just posed a question for the CGR ex-colleagues. And I want to build on six comment on what is the comparative advantage of the CGR on working on locally led adaptation? And and you're right, CARE has been doing this for years and years and years, and they have a machine. But I want to hear from you, how do you see, so what is the thing that CGR can bring into this very important conversation that other organizations are not in a position to bring, and that you are going to be doing this exceptionally well?
So I would just want to say we're each going to get one sentence, and I would say professionalize methodologies, and we need to really this COP is about collaboration and implementation. So we need to deliver in how can partners like CARE, private sector, public sector do it better. So we have to get our act together, not just have local use cases, but professionalize and get the methods out there, see what works where, would be my final comment. Over to you, Ryan. One sentence.
I think we bring analytical rigor and being able to apply specific things that are context driven, analyze that, but are windows into broader processes. So it's not just about place-based, but also being more general to make sure that what we've been doing through all these cases are more broadly applied.
Just a part, I would say that CGR can bring the integrated system thinking approach, because in the locally led adaptation, it's not just about one intervention. In a system, you need to look at collective action. So whether it is on breeding, whether it is on genetics, whether it's on water, whether it's on forest, that's a capability CGR can bring. Not others, organization can have a collective thinking on that.
I think another thing is brokering those partnerships. You and I were at a meeting in DC 2 weeks ago. The networks that we have, how we can bring those in with the World Bank, the IFC and others. And that comes back to brokering with humility, building on the research excellence, and linking in with NGO and other experiences.
Okay, Anna Marie, I knew I could count on you to ask hard questions, so thanks. This is a bit of a loaded question because we're talking comparative advantage versus vis-a-vis CARE, for example, and or others, and I think adding on to what John said is there's a certain convening power, the ability to draw. I mean, we have networks, and CARE has great networks and convening power as well. And this is where this is a loaded question. But I think one comparative advantage that the CG has very well is a massive stable of super potent high-end scientists who can learn, it's a hypothesis, to support locally led adaptation, to come in with a light touch instead of the usual, I've got this solution and you need to do it kind of approach of, oh, you've got this thing, that's cool. Let me bring in my expertise to help and support it. This is skill development within the CG that needs to happen. So the capacity building for collaborative technology design and co-creation is not something just for farmers. It's an important part, but that's a skill that CG scientists can learn. As with most things that are learned, some of us are better at than others, but that's an important part because locally led adaptation, and I liked how you put it, this is not locals left alone adaptation. That's important. And this is a challenge that we had with the Pioneer Positive Deviance work of bringing in the feeds and forages team to say, yeah, guys, you're not in charge here, but you want to support what's an ongoing process. And that was a great learning process.
The only missing linkage from today's discussion that I'm seeing that we sometimes the process or the systems that we are following, it keeping the farmers as farmers, the fishers as fishers, not the entrepreneurs who are also caring about their rate of return from their investment. So until that business dimension is there, that business model is linked with every successful locally led adaptation solutions, I think it will be very difficult to see a sustainable future.
Yeah, so many things have been said. So what, you know, I'm quoting from a Hindi movie. The thing is that don't underestimate the power of a common man, and we do not care, do value the power of common man, women, and youth. Secondly, what we do with them is actually action research. And that is why we used to more collaborate with the academia and researchers to bring evidence and improve the techniques and technology what we have been already been implementing. So yeah, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's build on what we have been doing. Thank you.
Right, a hand for everyone. Thanks again for being participating today. They are around if you want to ask them more questions. Thank you. Quick photo, quick photo.
Very interesting. Unfortunately, we didn't have time.
Okay.
What was really, really interesting is that men were interested enough